Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Levo. Simple, potent, at-home herbal infusions at the push of a button. Learn more at levooil.com and feed your enthusiasm. That's LEVOOIL.com.
This week on Meat and Three, we're spotlighting the people, dishes, and ingredients decolonizing food. We're looking at our Thanksgiving plates and beyond to explore efforts to reclaim food sovereignty in Native American culture, the African diaspora, and Puerto Rico.
I believe that oyster dressing is like the consummate side dish for an amazing fried turkey.
What we're doing there is just working the land, and we're laughing, and we're creating a space for joy. And it's in that healing occurs for us.
Tune in to Meat and Three, HRN's weekly food news roundup, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guests are Jane Lopes and Sarah Fernandez. We'll talk to Jane and Sarah about inequity and harassment in wine. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Sarah Fernandez got into wine and hospitality only a few years ago. She has worked at Shoji, Niche Niche, and Special Club in New York City. A graduate of Cornell University, she also spent many years in research at Jacobi, Mount Sinai, and NYU hospitals. She currently works in wine retail at Depinor in Brooklyn. Jane Lopes returns to the Grape Nation and also the United States after a long stint at Attica in Melbourne, Australia. She is the author of Vignette, Stories of Life and Wine in 100 Bottles. She received her Master Sommelier certification in 2018, only to have it revoked by the Court of Master Sommeliers. Jane is now the co-founder of Legend Wines, importers of curated Australian wines, with her husband, Jonathan Ross. Before we get started, I just want to say something. I recently reached out to Jane Lopes to come on the Grape Nation to talk about the recent story by Julia Moskin in the New York Times on sexual harassment in wine in the Court of Master Sommeliers. Jane graciously accepted and then suggested inviting Sarah Fernandez on the show. Sarah was the focus of another Julia Moskin story last year about sexual assault and a popular high-profile sommelier in New York City. Jane thought Sarah was an important voice and was part of the early stages of these sensational expose stories. As most people know, I'm an older white male, and I have hesitations hosting a show of this matter, but I felt it was important to use my platform and give voice to the people affected. I asked Jane and Sarah not to help with the process of putting the show together, but to be the process. I asked them to present me with the show outline and the talking points. So, welcome to the Grape Nation, Jane and Sarah. thank you for doing this show. We are taping this show on November 23rd, remotely via Zencaster. Thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's get this started. Julia Moskin from the New York Times has written 2 articles along with a bunch of follow-ups in the past year exposing the problems with sexual assault and harassment in the wine industry, including the quartermaster sommeliers. Sarah and Jane, both of you were the subjects and involved in those articles. So I would like you to walk us through the process of speaking out. You know, why do you speak out? I want to talk about the problems inherent in our industry. And I want to talk about with you guys, or I want you to talk about what the movement towards a better culture looks like. So really the first, question or topic I have for you is, I think it's very brave and heroic to speak out. The question is, what does it take to speak out? Why do you speak out? And then, what prevents you from not speaking out sooner? There's a lot there, but you could take it wherever you want. Sarah, you can start because, you were involved a year ago in that first article and it has since continued.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. And Jane, thank you for involving me in this conversation and, connecting our stories and really being a force to connect the larger aspect of sexual harassment in this industry beyond just CMS or the natural wine world. This is a issue that affects all women of all industries, but particularly in the restaurant and wine world. Part of the process of speaking out is because there's an entrenched culture of sexual harassment in the restaurant world. About 37% of all sexual harassment claims involve restaurant workers of all industries. And these issues have been documented in research publications and in many other instances for years now, dating back to the 90s. I was doing some research last night and nothing really has changed. Nothing really changed after my article came out, and speaking out is important because it brings light to a really serious issue of power in this industry.
But Sarah, you had I guess it was a personal struggle because you were involved, in a very specific incident. And didn't you have to wrestle with yourself whether to come out, when to come out, consequences?
Yeah, it was essentially when I experienced an issue with Anthony over the summer after I had been sexually assaulted by another person I had worked for. And the article is a testament to the amazing power of women and coming together and the amazing power of social media, because through social media, I saw somebody post very vaguely about, there's this person having sexual harassment who was just nominated to a high position. And it was, there had been plenty of sexual harassment claims. And through this network and talking to other women, I found out that this person, my experience had not been unique. And oftentimes that's the issue with a lot of these assaulters. If you're assaulted by somebody, it's often you're not the only one. And that's why speaking out and connecting and communicating about these topics is incredibly powerful, because assaulters use shame to keep their victims silent and keep their positions of power. And so it's a very visceral and exhausting process going through and recounting your trauma over and over and over again. I spent many months existing with the worry that speaking out was going to come back to haunt me because of the history of sexual assault in this industry. And so it was a very difficult decision, but one that I'm very glad that I made.
Yeah. Jane, you were literally front and center in the recent Times story. I mean, it was a cover story. You look at the picture, and there you are. Yeah. I mean, you, as I mentioned earlier, you were involved in the Master Som scandal. And then, you know, you elaborated on a lot of things in the recent Moskin story. You know, same question. I mean, what does it take to speak out? You know, why now?
Yeah, so I guess there are a few kind of parts to that. And I think, I think it's important to talk about why we sort of have to go down this road in the first place of kind of speaking out in an article, speaking out publicly. And it's because the law really hasn't caught up with the levels of inappropriate behavior in our industry and many others. I mean, the first sexual harassment case in this country was they tried it as a discrimination case, and that's still what sexual harassment law falls under, because they didn't know how else to classify it, how else to categorize these actions as illegal. And there's still so many laws that are working against us. I mean, take the Court of Master Sommeliers. It's not our employer, so it's very hard to hold them responsible under the law. The statute of limitations in most states is woefully small for these cases. It's like 1 year. And so there's just a lot of, there's not much other recourse. And a lot of these women have come forward to the board at the CMS, to positions of authority in the industry, to the HR in their companies, and nothing's been done. So there really isn't a lot of times another option. And in my case personally, you know, I had really normalized what had happened to me and totally accepted it and thought I was lucky that nothing worse had happened. And so when kind of the discussion around this article first started happening, and I don't think they'd mind me saying their names because they've been vocal about their roles in this, but Liz Dowdy Mitchell and Victoria James were kind of leading the charge on getting this together and talking to women, and they reached out to me and, you know, said, would I want to be involved? And, you know, my first reaction was, yeah, of course I want to be involved. I'm happy to kind of reach out to women and be, a sounding board. But I'm not going to go on record about my story because it's insignificant. And I stayed friends with the guy. And, you know, I just thought I had a really, I guess a quote unquote kind of weak story is what I felt of it. But, you know,
there is no weak story.
Yeah, and that's what I learned through the process and talking to kind of all these women. And, you know, by the end, I felt like I needed to go on record, like I needed to, very visibly support the cause and not just kind of be there to help behind the scenes. I needed to, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, like I needed to really kind of support the change I believed needed to happen in this industry.
Do you think, I mean, when things like this happen and you've been talking to people, are people aware of the laws and because they're so weak it discourages them, or they're not aware and when they choose to, you know, go in the legal direction, they realize how weak or antiquated the laws are? I mean, what's your feeling on that?
I guess I think that people don't really know. I think
right.
It's there are definitely organizations and resources out there that are providing that information, but you know, it's hard to be super kind of loud about it when it is overall a pretty discouraging field. Is that your feeling as well, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the process of going through legal channels to kind of like, first of all, what legal channels within the restaurant industry? There are no like independent boards that review this, whereas HR, even if you have HR is often oriented towards protecting the employer, not the employee. And we'll definitely get into talking about brave spaces and the things that need to change in this industry in order to remove sexual harassment from the prevalent culture. But, it's the process of recounting this very shameful experience is exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting, it's mentally exhausting, and the legal channels often require you to repeat that over and over and over again. First when you file a police report, then when you go to the lawyers, and then also often the onus is put on the victim to defend their case and to bring evidence against their assaulter. And so oftentimes you look at the whole process and you just think, wow, the system is set up for me to fail and for me to never get justice in terms of sexual harassment. Because just like Jane was saying, everything sexual harassment and sexual assault is under the legal guise, especially for in the professional setting, is very wonky and unexplored and undocumented. And there's not a lot of legal precedent set because it's just extremely emotionally exhausting.
So I was going to ask you what, I think I did ask, and I think you answered part of it, but, what prevents people from speaking out sooner and what prevents them from speaking out at all? I think part of that answer fairly is a screwed up, legal or corporate system. I mean, can you expand on that a little? And what other reasons? Jane?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think I think if you take, let's say, the CMS and sort of my story, women had kind of come forward to master sommeliers and even the board itself, and they were shut down, they were ignored, they were told they were being dramatic, and so those kind of whispers get around, and so everyone thinks there's nothing they can do about it,
Right.
And so there's just, as we've said, there's no real legal protection for coming, for any sort of lawsuit or charges brought against these sort of things. It's just still very much a gray area in the law, which it really shouldn't be. And so, there just really isn't much of a recourse. So if you're thinking, about speaking out, there's just so much downside, and women are afraid of retribution, which has certainly happened in our industry for women who've been vocal about these men in power. So I think it does take community, and it took, I think it was, for my particular article, it was knowing that there were several other women who were putting their names on record. I don't think any of us would have done it alone. And I have so much respect and admiration for Sarah and Raquel, who, they were the only two to put their names on record. And that's, two's better than one, but it's still a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that it was easier for me to frame my experience as standing up with Raquel through this process. I think, to go back to Jane's point, I mean, these speaking up processes only happen through community. And I talked to a lot of women. There were a lot of women I spoke to on the phone who had encounters with Anthony, and that's part of the emotionally exhausting process, is you're hearing other people's experiences. And unfortunately, they didn't want to come forward because of the severe retribution. I mean, this was just, a young kid getting his start. Imagine a master sommelier who is like, you've looked up to your entire life. And so it is, the culture has to totally change, and it has to be more, we have to start naming these things in order for people to feel comfortable to start processing their own trauma of what they've been through.
And I also think, you guys have been an inspiration to make it easier. Not, I don't want to use the word easier, but to make it more realistic to come forward, more quickly and more clearly. I mean, nobody should stand for, any of this BS. The Moskin articles and others, were successful because of your bravery, creating awareness and attention, to these problems. And it's not just one problem there, sexual harassment is, the major, but there were other things too. I'm curious, and we broached it a little. How do these articles come to be? There's that whole curiosity I have that, you pick the paper up and there's Jane standing there, and Sarah, you sitting there, and it's like this explosive article. And it just didn't happen the day before. I mean, I want you guys to, talk to me about, the process for you guys, how you were involved and how it came to be. And, Julia's bravery, I mean, your sense of what she had to do. You want to start, Sarah?
Sure,
because
yeah.
you were the first article, major article.
Here's the thing is I wasn't the first. Raquel had written a letter to Alice Faring a year before we even started talking to each other, a year before Anthony was nominated as, best new song in America by Wine and Spirits or whatever. She had written a letter to Alice Faring because Alice Faring was Anthony's self-proclaimed mentor, telling her what had transpired. And she shut her down. And that's also why we speak up, because sometimes the people who perpetuate the silence is not just the men, it's the women. And I don't think it's fair to gender exactly like that. But that's why we have to call everybody in to this issue. But like I said before, there's real power in community. I mean, communicating and talking and pushing through those feelings of shame and finding networks of safety and social support are incredibly powerful and important to create a conducive professional environment moving forward. And I started talking to people. I saw I saw a post on Instagram, and then I started talking to Marissa Ross, and she really was the proponent of pulling these stories together. And, she'd be like, hey, would you be willing to talk to this person? And would you be willing to get on the phone with this person? And each time, we did, we cried, we gave love, and we processed what had happened to us. And I think through through that article, I started to process other experiences of sexual abuse and trauma that I had experienced. And it really kind of opened up a lot of my own personal healing and transformation. And that's what I hope for everybody else moving forward when they read these. But other women, they were really scared to come forward. And eventually, and Julia was just an angel. She was so gentle and so guiding and so validating in all of the experiences, because she had to do a little bit of therapy with us. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, definitely. Maybe more than a little bit of therapy. We met, and Raquel, her and I got breakfast, and we talked through the process of what it was going to look like. And I think that her strength and Raquel's strength is really what kept me and also the strength of the women who I worked with at Niche. I would talk to them and be like, oh, now they want me to put my name on it. Now they want me to put my face on a photograph. Yeah. It just kept, it was a slow progression. I think Julia did that on purposely and cautiously. I'm thankful for it. But these strong women they were like, look, if you're going to do it, go all the way, because we will have your back. And they gave me the strength and my strong support network. And I mean, my amazing, strong, and beautiful mother who is so loud. And I think that through this process, you learn, you gather strength, you process your own trauma, and you step into what being an advocate can really bring towards your own healing.
Yeah, I mean, it's it seems like there's no other way to do it. You should come out, you should speak out, the effect that it has positively on the industry, but you just, eloquently said, how it's a process. So it organically grows. This is happening in the industry. You start talking to people, more people, and then it really becomes something, and then a Julia Moskin gets involved. What about you, Jane? I mean, your story literally, like I said, ran a few weeks ago. How did that come about? Because in your case, there were more participants, in the story versus Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, kind of, so, Victoria, Liz, and I got together and just, you've heard a lot of things over the years, and we reached out to women, and, we tried to just be kind of a supportive ear for people to talk to. And it was really, it was a lot of people were like, oh, wow, I thought I was the only one. I think as much as sometimes people think, oh, everyone knows this is going on, a lot of people think that, they carry that shame of oh, I'm the only one who's experienced this and I did something to deserve it, or I could have handled it better. And I think we've all had those thoughts. And so it was, it was really liberating for all of us to see that this wasn't us. It wasn't our fault. We weren't alone. And so, we kind of did some initial story collecting and then turned some, the names of people who were willing to talk to Julia, and we kind of handed it over to Julia. And it's probably about 6 weeks of sort of intensive work on Julia's behalf, maybe 8 weeks. And, it was a lot for her. I mean, she spent probably 5 hours talking to me alone, and I ended up being a sentence in the article, so it really, like, I can't even imagine the time she put in those 6 weeks. It's a huge investment, and it's a huge emotional investment. She really, as Sarah said, was sort of a therapist and made me realize some things about my experience that I hadn't really registered before, in terms of, I just always thought, like, well, I wasn't traumatized by my experience, so it's okay. And she's like, no, you don't have to be traumatized by it for it to be inappropriate behavior. And so, it should just, she's been doing this for a while, and she just had so many amazing insights. And, it's a lot of back and forth. And then, the kind of the scariest part was probably the last week or two. And she, it's the New York Times. It's, the journalism standards are very, very high.
The pinnacle.
So all of the stories have been vetted, have been investigated, have been corroborated. And she has to give the accused a chance to respond. And they have to know the names of their accusers. So that was kind of a scary part too in the last few weeks of knowing that that these men had our names and had been reached out to. But at that point we'd formed a kind of a WhatsApp chat of the women who were going on record, and we really, an incredible group of women, and everyone just was there to support each other and have each other's backs if they were hearing from the men or just were having doubts. And I think that without that, I think, I know of a number of these articles that have gotten to that point, and then the women going on record have pulled out. So I think I think having that group and having each other's backs and knowing that you're not just going on record for yourself, but for everyone else who's going on record, everyone who's not going on record, who's experienced these sorts of behaviors, and everyone who could experience them in the future. So it was, it was not. I had no idea what I was sort of signing up for when I started talking about this in the beginning, and it's ended up honestly being more illuminating and meaningful than I expected.
Did either of you get contacted by any of the accused men, or even, people outside of the specific accused?
Well, I think that is a telltale sign of kind of like how Anthony handled it, and like really moving into what needs to the steps moving forward of really seeing some sort of transformative justice come about. Anthony just basically pieced off the face of the earth, and didn't respond to anybody, never even responded to Julia when she reached out to him for the article.
Really?
Yeah. And not even, like when I did the interview with Miguel, the 6-month retrospective, he hadn't even heard from Anthony, and they were very, very close professionally. And Anthony just stopped talking. So sorry to jump in, but.
Yeah, no, we're talking to Jane Lopes and Sarah Fernandez. Jane, in your article with Julia, there were a lot more people accused and involved. Was there any reaction to any of the other women or you from those guys? Like, what are you doing? Or any intimidation, or they laid low?
Obviously there were more people, so I think they all each handled it differently. I haven't personally had any of them reach out to me. I know, some of them have completely disappeared. I know a couple of them who are still active on social media. I know a couple of them who are still attending CMS, town halls and stuff like that. Like, there are a few who just seem to not feel any shame, but none of them have come forward and made a statement, which, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but you would think that maybe there would be some amount of impulse in taking some responsibility and apologizing, but that doesn't seem to be an impulse that any of these men have.
It's amazing. I agree with you. One last thing on the article, and you guys pointed this out to me, and I think it has a lot to do with how the story comes out, and that's, Jane, you mentioned, it's the New York Times, but, the solid journalistic practices of someone like a Julia Moskin, I guess being a woman, being, a great writer, but in your mind, didn't that have a lot to do with, how the story develops and how well it develops? Jane? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think, as much as I'm a proponent of women speaking out, I think it's important to do it in the right sort of context, and trusting your story to the right person. And the fact that Julia had done these sorts of articles before, the fact that the New York Times, has such kind of very strict journalism procedures, they're protecting themselves as much as anyone else, and that ends up benefiting everyone with how they go about the process. But I think who Julia is and who the New York Times are is made a huge difference in me wanting to go on record. And I don't know if there's like too many other news sources that I would really want to trust like that.
And Sarah, when your story came out, and it was a very emotional thing to come out, during the process with Julia, you felt comfortable? Everything she was doing and developing it, you felt was done right and going in the direction it should go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the invaluable uniqueness of having somebody who's able to create space for very sensitive topics like this, and trusting a reputable news source going through the vetting process. It takes a long time. I mean, we started talking at the end of August and the article came out November 1st. So that
Wow.
entire time, Raquel and I are just, we're just texting each other like, all right, you okay today? And texting Julia, texting her, emailing her, and really having a guiding force to know that you don't have to be the strongest person in the room anymore is incredibly, and that somebody is going to be able to translate all of the noise and trauma that you've experienced into a cohesive story and put evidence out there in the public eye for everybody to see of what happened. Because, sometimes we need somebody else to help us understand and make sense of what occurred, and to put language that we might not have to our experiences. And
Great point.
Yeah,
That's a great point, and that's obviously why Julia, was effective in getting this message out. We have to take a quick break. I am talking to Jane Lopes and Sarah Fernandez. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the problems inherent in our industry, and I want to get into, what the movement towards a better culture looks like. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Levo, the world's most intelligent at-home infuser. It's super easy to use to make infusions for cooking, candies, cosmetics, and herbal medicines. When the box showed up, I was excited to try it out, as I've heard good things about the machine. It looks like a space-age coffee maker on the counter, and having it out makes me want to infuse everything. I've got plans for the hot peppers on my counter and the sage I picked from the garden before the first freeze last week, along with some other choice herbs and spices. I think everyone on my list is going to get infused oils this year. So far, I've used it for cannabis, basil, and orange peel infused oils and butter. The machine even has dry and activate functions for the highest potency and stability in your infusions, and you can connect through Wi-Fi to track your progress and record your recipes and share with the Levo community. Learn more at levooil.com. That's LEVOOIL.com.
This episode is supported by Nourish and Flourish. Nourish and Flourish features behind-the-scenes stories about artisans, producers, farmers, growers, and other makers in America, along with delicious and wholesome recipes. The latest issue of Nourish and Flourish is a special artisanal gift guide showcasing some of America's finest products, including everything from the farm and garden to eco-friendly home goods, kitchen and cooking essentials, bath and body, original art, blown glass, seasonal recipes, and so much more. Shop online to support local and buy local. Together, we can make a difference. Learn more at nourishandflourish.site.
Okay, we're back. We're back with my guests, Jane Lopes and Sarah Fernandez. Janie, you were getting into the court a little, and I want to spend a few minutes on that because that's a big deal, and it was a big part of, the article that you were in. Julia's recent article from early November specifically targeted the Court of Master Sommeliers, and you talked a little about that nobody has come forward, no apologies. I mean, that's sort of been the MO of what's been going on back to your Master Somm scandal. So let's talk about, the future of the court. I mean, Jane, you may be a little more intimately involved, but Sarah, you are right in there. And we didn't even get into the deep stuff. And I think people can read the article and find out more. But does an organization like the CMS, Court of Master Sommeliers, deserve to survive? Does it deserve to survive in its current, incarnation, whatever's proper? Jane, you go first on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the question of the hour in the CMS circles. I think they've obviously made a lot of missteps in handling, this crisis, in handling the cheating scandal in terms of, racial equity, and that kind of came to the forefront earlier this year. I think, the organization has, I think most people can admit, has mishandled and misstepped along the way. I think there are some really great people in the organization right now who want to make changes, but I also feel like there's a lot of people in the organization who basically want to make the minimum amount of changes to survive and ensure that their own power and status is kept intact.
How do you feel about that?
That's not okay.
Right.
I think this organization needs to change. It's been a members only club. It's been a club that exists to serve the interest of its members. And that needs to change. Its whole mission statement, it's who's a member, that would all really radically need to change to serve the industry. And that is right now not the primary goal. And so I would say that's the...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
But just to clarify the point, there's, in the U.S., less than 160 master sommeliers and 12,000 members, and that's the organization. Yeah. The members don't feel like they're part of the organization and have the input. The board and the somms seem to have all the sway, and that's backwards. Do you agree with that?
I do, but it literally, that's kind of been the I guess the myth that they've perpetrated, is that everyone is a member, but that's fundamentally not true. The membership is only master sommeliers. And that's been, so as much as they like to talk about how they serve the everyone who's testing and the industry at large, that really is not who is a part of the organization. At the end of the day, it is just master sommeliers. So I really think that the whole, the whole structure would need to radically change. And then I think you have to kind of consider whether even a structure like that is the most beneficial for the industry, that kind of hierarchy. And I think the fact that it's so secretive and there's such a lack of transparency in order to maintain this sort of rarefied status has been one of the major problems,
Right.
There should be 2,000 master sommeliers in the U.S.
Right.
And then it becomes less of a kind of a secret members only club, and it becomes less sort of rarefied, and it takes, it for sure takes some of the power away from those 160 people. But that's what that power is what has allowed them to prey on and profit from the industry. And so I just don't know if people are willing to give up their power. I don't know if they are. And so that's...
Also to point out, out of 155 U.S. master sommeliers, 131 of them are male. So they have a fairly significant handle on that. And to your point, they probably don't want to give up what they have.
Yeah, and I just don't think they will ever, I don't think it could ever be a positive force in the industry until they do.
So Sarah, hearing that and, knowing everything that's been going on, what's your perspective? I mean, where do you know, Jane is way intimately more involved. I mean, she was one of the 23 involved in the cheating scandal. I wouldn't say you're an outsider, but you look at it differently. You know, what do you make and what do you do with that organization?
Yeah, I mean, when you go over those numbers that when you look at the representation, how is that representative of the people who actually work in the industry as a whole? I mean, if like 90% of the people in power are white men, and we know that 90% of the people who work in this restaurant industry are not white men. In fact, it's the opposite.
Right.
The majority of the people who work in this industry are BIPOC, they're queer, they're minorities, they're undocumented. They're actually the most vulnerable of our population. They're the people, you know, the restaurant industry attracts those who may not typically fall into be able to get pathways towards work in other more traditional settings, or have been excluded from other traditional industries. And so I think that when I hear that, as somebody who is a little nascent to this industry and who spent some time focusing on social justice issues, working in public health and examining racial biases in our healthcare system, racial and gender biases in our healthcare system, it's disheartening to know that, you know, that these factors are still at play in this incredibly vulnerable industry. What we need is we need proper representation. The people who are master sommeliers should be representative of the sommelier community in general, or the wine community in general. I mean, you know, I think that Jane and I talked about it. In order for this industry to survive, you know, so we have some people talking about getting younger wine drinkers involved or interested, you know, like some other people are talking about combating the White Claw syndrome, and how do we introduce a new generation to a beverage that has been kind of siphoned and put behind a
So
wall.
everything you're telling me, Jane and Sarah, I mean, there needs to be attention to a younger and more diverse, you know, membership and audience. To me, it sounds like, you know, they're not good at reacting to issues involving diversity, racial inequality, the George Floyd thing. We all saw how that played out. I mean, I'm going to ask you this question. Doesn't it seem like this thing pretty much has to be blown up beyond a few changes? Sarah, Jane, go ahead,
I'm not
Sarah.
in it, so I'll let Jane give, but she knows my opinion.
But my question is, how is it going to be done unless substantial changes are made?
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately don't think, I don't think that the organization can or should survive. I think even if those seriously substantial changes were made, which I think is a real long shot, you still have a structure that has acted as a unsafe space for so many people, for women, for Black people, people of color, Indigenous people. This has been a really unsafe space, and you know, unless you got rid of the word master, unless you got rid of the pins, unless you really just like totally broke it down, I just don't think it could ever be a safe space for those communities. And you know, and also like, are these people the best equipped to make those changes and to lead this industry? And I think they've really proven time and time again that they're not, you know? So I just don't know how this group of people that's allowed all these things to happen for years we can expect that that they're going to be the ones to kind of lead the industry out of this is just, I think it's kind of a misplaced sentiment.
Could it shrivel away to become an irrelevant organization? Is that part of?
We don't also need them by framing them as defining, standard and gold standard. We're giving them power, and in reality,
yeah, right.
We don't need them. There is transformative justice going on right now with other systems coming into place and making things right without these power structures that have perpetuated the system of abuse. I mean,
so Sarah, Jane, did you want to say something?
Please.
No, I was just, I was agreeing.
So this is a good segue for me. Because I want to talk about, transformative justice. I think it's pretty clear, that institutions, like CMS may not deserve to lead or even survive, which we got into a little, until they have done the work to educate or transform themselves. And the CMS seems to be, bad at that. Sarah, this is something that I know you're very passionate about, and I want you to talk to me about transformative justice, not so much anymore about the CMS, but in hospitality, and I guess it applies anywhere, corporate world, small businesses, big businesses.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the beauty of the intersectionality of wine is that, it's a vessel through which we can start to broach many different subjects. I mean, just from transformharm.org, this is a definition I took from Mia Mingus. Transformative justice is a political framework and approach for responding to violence, harm, and abuse. At its most basic, it seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence and or engaging in harm reduction to lessen the violence. Transformative justice can be thought of a way to make things right, getting in the right direction, or creating justice together. So really I see it as like a grassroots project, because at the end of the day, oftentimes it falls on those most vulnerable to be the bravest and speak out and really start perpetuating this change that needs to happen. It does not rely, transformative justice responds and interventions don't rely on the state or the presumed power structures, example, CMS. So if we keep framing CMS as the gold standard, then that's what we're going to respond to, then that's how we're going to be reflected upon. It doesn't reinforce or perpetuate violence such as oppressive norms and most importantly, it actively cultivates the things we know that prevent violence, such as healing, accountability, resilience, and safety for those involved. So has the CMS done any of those things? I mean, no. Jane?
No, absolutely not.
But Jane, Jane, you brought up earlier, how the legal system is somewhat void at handling all of this. I mean, this is a step in a direction with a lot more specifics. And an opportunity for people.
Yeah, and I do think there are lawyers out there who are doing really good work, but they're having to be so creative because the legal system itself, the laws itself have not caught up with the change that needs to happen. So, it's kind of couching things under different laws, or, Time's Up is an example of a campaign that kind of is supported by a lot of lawyers taking on different cases that they can't pursue kind of through the framework of the law. So they're putting things in, the public arena. So yeah, I just think there's, by even, and Sarah and I talked about this, like by even kind of, it's not my goal to take down the CMS, because even that goal really centers them. Where I would rather put my energy into positive arenas. And this is how I felt after 2018 too, where it's why I didn't retest. It's also why I didn't sue them. You know, it was just like, I just wanted to walk away from them. I didn't want my energy caught up with them anymore. You know, I wanted to write my book and start my company, and you know, I'm been in lots of conversations about what are some positive institutions that we can implement in this industry, to create safe spaces, and you know, I think that's where I want my energy to be.
Yeah.
I agree. And Sarah, we talked about this a little. There are some organizations, you know, disruptors, that have taken very specific steps. I had Zev Rovine on the show less than a month ago, and he's creating, you know, you have to start somewhere, a code of conduct for his employees, and then maybe extend it to his suppliers, winemakers, and even the restaurants he deals with. And then you made me aware of, you know, Wine Fair with a very extensive pledge. So if things like that get out and people understand and buy in, I mean, that's another step. Talk about that a little.
Yeah, I mean, one part of why I spoke up and put my name and face on this subject is because I wanted to call to action other victims of this system who have suffered abuses and traumas. And because it's a grassroots issue, we need to band together, and people need to know that they can come out and they can talk, and that if we get together and we communicate and we build this energy, and like Jane said, put our energy into positive organizations, like one of which, the Price of Admission, which was a workshop that was dismantling sexual and racial discrimination in the natural wine world. It was a huge workshop. That's where I met Zev, and that's where I was introduced to the code of conduct that was put together by the Vanguard and Pamela Bush, who chairs that. And I was first introduced to these concepts of like really enforcing consent culture in our workplace. And I think that, you know, there are people out there who are trying to disrupt our education, because knowledge is power, right? We know that. We know undergraduate degrees are very expensive for a reason. And in order to disrupt these systems of power, we have to disseminate information and get it out there to people who are interested in. You know, Yurka J is started industry sessions with Jim Slay, and it's for BIPOC and LGBTQ plus community who want to learn about wine, and every couple of weeks they have a different wine expert come and donate their time and give a lesson in a session, and they have wine stores donate wine so that we can taste, you know, during this when we're all stuck in COVID distancing. I mean, there are people like Raquel and Zacharias who are opening Auxilio and Amigex, which is a nonprofit community space. It's not a restaurant, but they will feed you. You know, it's an area for people, BIPOC, LGBTQ, again, to come together and take and have space in a kitchen if you want to work on a project, or if you need to do catering, or just like a safe space. And you can create this in your own community. And I think that we're here also for a call to action to help people get involved in this code of conduct.
Yeah. I wanted to, and we'll mention some of these organizations. I mean, I'll post them, and, you know, we'll mention them at the end of the show. We're starting to wind down time-wise, but I wanted to cover, you know, two areas that become more personal to you. You know, one is self-care. I mean, after all this happens, Janie, after, you know, the testing scandal, and after the article, Sarah, after, you know, your article, you know, how do you take on self-care? Sarah, Jane, you described a little about, you know, just being positive. That's one thing I want you to talk about. And I guess what becomes very important is, the culture of consent culture, which has, been an issue and a problem. Janie, you talked a little about, self-care. I mean, your healing process was not making a big deal. That's not the way, I didn't mean to say it that way. Not pursuing the cheating scandal, embedding yourself in a book. I mean, are those the things you do? What other things?
Yeah, I mean, I have gotten better at self-care over the years. It used to be like just kind of go and sort of distract myself from whatever was going on. But I think, I think it's everything from, I like to focus my energy on positive things. I think that's hugely impactful for me. And, I have lots of respect if people kind of have a crusade, if they want to, take down the CMS or whatever it is,
right.
If that's what they want to spend their energy on and that is what kind of drives them, all good. I just, for me, it's spending my energy on positive things. It's, trying to get enough sleep and drink water and exercise.
The basic stuff.
Yeah. And honestly, the things that we don't focus on in our industry. And it's,
right. That are not a luxury to even take.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I think the CMS sort of culture of, you're working full time and then you're studying, 20, 30 hours a week, is really not beneficial for people's well-being. I felt the worst I have ever felt in my life the 3 days I was taking tasting and service exams in 2018. I just was miserable. I wasn't sleeping. And
it's very well documented in the book, Jane. I mean, how physical and how mental, and that's a plug for the book, which, fits in here because, now you're in a better place, but Jesus, you're just scratching, the surface with all of that.
Oh,
and
yeah,
Sarah, Sarah, in getting to know you, I find positivity, a big part of you. And I think you're in a healing process right now. True?
Absolutely. I'm very vocal that I am not okay, and I think that's okay to say I'm not okay. After the article came out, I dove back in. It was such a stressful process that once it came out, I felt relieved, and it was I dove into work and I used that to distract myself, and I used other things to distract myself from the trauma that I needed to process. And now I'm processing it. But I think one of the things that I've learned is if you heal yourself and you heal your individual, then you can start to heal your community. You can start to create space for others and heal in that way. And that is, I really want everybody to take it. I think that's what 2020 has taught us. It's taken away the things that we want and it's given us the things that we need. And sometimes that's healing yourself before you can start to heal those around you. And
Sarah, I think that's a perfect place to end the show. Great. But finish your sentence.
I was just say, just drink water, sleep, and
there you go.
Take care of yourself.
I think positivity, to end the show on positivity and both of you embracing it and, moving in a direction of healing and getting on with it is a great thing to hear. I thank you both for coming on. Let me just do a quick wrap up. What I want you guys to do, because we don't have time, is send me a few resources that I will post on social media that is, pertinent to everything we talked to. We mentioned a few. But, let me get out a list of, different organizations. If you have any comments about the show, questions or suggestions, please email me at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Please subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Follow us for more information and updates on what we discussed on Facebook, The Grape Nation, at The Grape Nation. On Instagram, we're at SBenruby. On Twitter, we're at BenRuby, but we always use the hashtag The Grape Nation on both. Jane and Sarah, I I don't know, does it make sense to tell people where they can follow you on social media? Just to keep up, Janie on the wine business, Sarah on your travels. Janie, where can we find you?
I'm at Janie, Janey, Maxine, Maxine, on both Instagram and Twitter, but I hardly ever use Twitter. So Instagram, and then that in my bio is my business handle as well. So yeah, follow me on both of those.
That's why I call you Janie, because it's on your...
I know. And
it's on your thing, and you put it out there, so I embraced it.
I know. It's fun.
Sarah, where can we follow you and what's going on?
Yeah, you can. My Instagram handle is Sarah Marina Fernandez, SarahMarinaFernandez, and follow me there. You can message me. I post a lot about mental health and resources. I'm just, I want to throw it out there. I get another call to action for anybody who wants to, who feels like they want to use positive momentum and move forward. We're getting you're supported, you're heard, you're seen, and you're loved.
Sounds great. All right, I want to thank my guests, Jane Lopes and Sarah Fernandez. I might say that I love both of you guys for coming on and doing this, and everything that preceded this and we discussed has been very brave and has had a major impact on what's going on, in our world. So thank you for that. Thank you to our engineer, Amanda, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. And thanks for listening.